Okay, let us continue. Okay, so your capacity is your leverage. So leverage is how much output you get with X amount of input. So let's say, so using the ocean example, it would be how big is your cup? Like when you go, if you to get water or to pick up water from the ocean, let's say you have to walk down, and no matter how much you get, you have to walk down and walk back. Now the question is, how big is your container and how much do you carry per trip? So that's the leverage. So if you have $1 million idea, which I mean, you don't have like the value of your idea is almost entirely dependent on your ability to execute. So you can $1 million idea is like saying, if I had a bucket, I could carry a bucket of water and then going to the ocean with a teaspoon. Whereas you could have the same idea, or like this $1 million idea could be had by someone else, and they would make a bucket and go get the water. Or maybe if they had a car, they would look at this idea and go, why would I make a bucket when I can just drive my car over or drive my truck over and fill up a tank? So the idea of this having $1 million idea is basically worthless. You cannot capture the million without the carrying capacity. And if you have the carrying capacity, you don't need $1 million ideas. We chase feelings or impulse when we don't have plans. So if you don't have a plan for things you want to do, you will always be subject to whatever you feel like doing at that time. Hatred and love are not opposites. Apathy is the opposite of both of them. Hatred and love, on the other hand, are very similar because their well-being is of great concern to you. You think about them frequently. It agitates you when something happens to them, whether for the good or bad, and so on and so forth. So you get the idea, right? It's like you feel what you desire to have, what you want to happen to them is different. How you feel when something good happens to them is opposite, but it is it is like anxiety versus excitement. They're basically pretty much the same feelings. It's how you interpret the feeling, right? It's like it's the thought or the description you have of the event, and the event is increased heart rate, increased physical like adrenaline, etc., whatever. And your description is, for anxiety, is I'm not going to enjoy this activity, and the description or the event in your head, the thought that through which you process the event of your the physiological event is I am going to enjoy the next activity. Those are the two things. That is what separates anxiety from excitement, and hatred and love is what separates. It's the description that separates them as well. It's like if something good happens to them, it's this thing happens to them, I feel some sort of way, and it's I don't like that this happened to them, or I like that this happened to them. Now, obviously, anyways, I'm gonna ignore that. So, apathy is the opposite of both. I don't even remember which book I pulled this from. I think it was Inner Engineering. Anyways, people are upset because they externalize their power. Yes. So if you're upset, generally speaking, you feel that you are upset because something happened or someone did something. So you are hinging the power over your emotions on things that are external. So you can basically the claim is that you can only be upset if you externalize the power over your emotions to some external factor. Winners lose more than losers. Difference is that winners decided that they wanted to win eventually, and they're willing to lose until they win. Losers decide that they don't want to lose, so they decide to stop playing. I don't know what made me write this note. Probably Chris Williamson. We can do big things because we can rest. So when you rest first without expending your energy, you're wasting the energy. Okay, so I'll give you an example here. Let's say you want to do 100 push-ups. Just a simple example. Maybe you probably, most people can't do 100 push-ups in a row. But if you do, say, 5 push-ups and then rest a minute, you can do 5 more push-ups. But if you rest a minute before doing 5 push-ups, you can still only do 5 push-ups. And the total push-ups you'll be able to do in this amount of time has now decreased by 5 because you didn't spend that energy before you rested for the minute. And obviously this is a very micro example, but so when you look at something big and go, I can't do that, and you take your break without doing a small part of that big thing, which I do all the time, basically, which is what I need to do less of course. But the point is, when you do that, you are failing to do big things, I guess. I don't know. That's all I wrote. We can do big things because we can rest. That's what I wrote. Anyways. We need to accept and admit to ourselves that most decisions aren't made rationally. Otherwise, we will defend mistakes to the death over learning. Yeah, okay, so, I mean, the majority of I've mentioned this before, but the majority of your decisions are made subconsciously, are made impulsively, are made on autopilot, and we need to accept that most of our decisions are not made from a set of reasons that we rationally think through, because we because of our defense of free will, we feel that we must defend that every single action that could be a product of a decision we made is a product of a active decision we made. So when you accept that most of your decisions are not made as a result of rational deduction and reasoning, then you can decide that it was just an action you took, and that you don't have to defend the action, but you can look at the action externally, not internally, like not from within the action, but from without the action, and then judge whether or not you should repeat this action or whether or not you should do something differently. So, in summary, accept that you don't have to defend everything you do, basically, or say. Don't need to be defensive. Okay, next note. Rationality is not to suppress your emotions. It is to play around your emotions, which is a setting of the game, and not something you can unequip. Okay. So basically, if you know yourself, truly know yourself, then you're going to make decisions that you will actually follow, which comes back to my example of parenting, which is basically to say, you know the way you will react. So if you just fill up your schedule, knowing that you're not the kind of person who's built up the habits to actually stick to this rigid schedule, which has no time in between, you're probably going to fail, you're probably going to rebel, you're probably going to throw a tantrum at your rational self and go, I'm not going to do that, and then end up not doing any of it. So you have to play around the way you actually act. So if you make decisions as if you will not reject it, is to fail at making change. if I say tomorrow I'm going to run for 5 kilometers, it's possible for me to do, but it is very unlikely that I'll get up and do it, and probably end up not running at all. Whereas if I say I'm going to run 1 kilometer, it's more likely that I do it. So I have to make plans accounting for, and with the knowledge of what I would actually do. That's just an example. Okay. Observations don't make conclusions factual. Okay, you can see something, you can make an observation, you can have a fact, and you can have a thought about this fact, and then you can draw a conclusion on this fact. The observation is factual, but your conclusion isn't necessarily factual, because your logical deduction may not be sound. Because we are extremely subjective beings. We filter every piece of information through, and this is important, our expectations and our life experiences. But mostly our expectations and assumptions and so on. And we hold on. Mo Goddard had a list of seven filters. It was like or 6. I can't remember what they were. I think I mentioned them before. But yeah, so if you make a claim and then quote unquote back it up with a fact, you have to first check if the fact actually backs up your claim, or if you only made your claim through viewing the fact through a very heavy filter. Let's find an example for my personal experience. Let's say when someone says the word, I don't know, can I think of an example? Day trading. I'll use day trading as an example because that one actually does apply. And they say, they're talking about day trading. And I have a different impression of day trading than them. It means something different to me. So language is a means of communicating what they think in their brain to me. But that only works if the language is equivalent. So if the same words he says implies a different feeling, impression, history, it's associated with different memories, facts, and experiences in his mind, it's going to trigger very different facts, memories, experiences, feelings in my mind, and I'm going to understand the words differently than the way he understands them. So think of it as language is like a code, right? It's you have to decrypt it and you have to encode it. When you speak, you are encoding it. And if they decode it with a different function that you encoded it with, they will get a different meaning. They will understand it differently. It's going to be translated incorrectly. So your experiences and your understanding is going to affect the way you encode it. And their understanding is going to affect the way they decode it. The filters and our worldview is a function that encodes and decodes it. Decodes our words. So it is important to clear up any words that could be understood differently if you actually want to carry your meaning across. Or it is alternatively, you can be very precise with your words. And it is very interesting because even if you are very precise with your words, they can quote your words back to you wrong if they choose to view it with great bias. So point is, you have to understand that the same words you speak doesn't mean, when you put thoughts from your brain into words, it doesn't mean that it will create the same thoughts in someone else's brain. Which is why, comes back to the fact about what I was saying about observing something, an event, an object, a fact, a statement. When you take what you observe and put it through the decoding function of your experiences into your brain, you have a thought. And then that thought creates a conclusion. And that conclusion may not be a fact when it comes back out. Okay, next. Attentional blinks. If you find something you are looking for, your brain will blink. And this is from Andrew Huberman, talking about attentional blinks, which is basically to say, when they told their test subjects to look for, say, a letter of the alphabet, let's say a T or a U, for example, and there's a sequence of letters, and if they put the T and the U next to each other, when they see the T, they found what they're looking for, and their attention blinks and stops seeing more things. So they will see the T and not immediately see the U. They'll see it soon, very quickly, but there's going to be a moment or moments where after seeing the T, they cannot see the U, which I think is very interesting. Anyways, so basically that is to say, if you find something you're looking for, you will definitely miss information. And actually, now that I read this sentence out loud, it actually makes me think of people in heated arguments, for example, where neither party can communicate to the other person because they're viewing what the other person says through such a heavy filter. They're not trying to understand. They're looking for something they're trying to hear. And when they hear that, they don't try to decode what they're saying. They just see that and go, I got you. This is what you said. I see this word. And that this must be what you mean, because this is what I think you mean, and I found that you said something that could imply what I'm thinking you're saying, and therefore I found what it is you're saying, even though it is absolutely not what you're saying. This is actually completely unrelated to the note with which I wrote this note, but when I read it out loud, this is what it made me think of. Okay. I don't want to go on the next note because I feel like it can be a bit too long. I want to talk about something else. So I'm going to change the topic. I wanted to start a new book today, but on the first page I stopped because it was so special that I wanted to come back to it during the journal here today. And basically on page 1, so there's part 1, and then it's part 1 is like 13 challenges, and the title page for the challenge is demonstrate humility. And that's all well and good, but here's the note. Here's the subtext. It says, has your lack of humility ever limited your perspective or lessened your influence as a leader? And lessen your influence as a leader is this is about leadership, but I think influence as a leader can be extrapolated elsewhere, obviously, because leadership and entrepreneurship and management is really just a reflection of what things that you should control your own way of thinking and actions. So what makes good leadership is what makes good self-leadership, I guess. I don't know any other way to put it. It's like when you think about what you want of a leader, it is how it is in a way. It is ultimately a way you should treat yourself, and also what you, if you are a leader, what you want of a good follower is also a good way you should treat yourself. So when you have good leadership and good, so if I mean, I guess it comes back to parenting, right? It's like parenting is a good form of good measurement of leadership. The way a parent treats his child and the way the child whether or not the child follows the father. It's not so, and the child is influenced by the parent or mother. But the point is, the leader must go first, and they must adjust if it doesn't work, if the child doesn't listen. And, you know, we won't listen to ourselves. If I say I want to build a business working 10 hours a day, I'm not going to do it because that's not like, and if I try to do that with my kid, they wouldn't do it, right? So it's like I have to treat myself in a way that I would listen. And in return, I would have to listen. And because if my dad, like if my parents, quote imaginary in this case, treated me extremely well, and when I say well, I don't mean cared for me, because obviously most parents care, but I mean if they, in order to get me to do things, acted in a way that is conducive to getting me to do things, then I would do those things. That is the return on acting in a way to get them. So you act in a way that will get you to do things, and in return, you do those things. So it's the two-way relationship. Anyways, so let me just finish reading this. Has your lack of humility ever limited your perspective, or lessened your influence as a leader? And in this case, I'm going to, for a more general statement that doesn't just apply to leadership, I'm going to rephrase this with lessened your ability to accept information. Has your lack of humility ever limited your perspective or lessened your ability to accept information? And here's the most important part. It's the second question on this page, which is, would you even know if it had? So would you even know if your lack of humility limited your perspective and blah, blah, blah? And the answer to the first question is yes, obviously, for everybody. Everybody has moments where they lacked humility and were not receptive to information, were unable to see information that was there because they didn't have humility in that moment, because they felt like they knew better, or because they felt like they didn't need this information. And the answer to the second question for everybody is also no. At the time, you didn't know that you limited out information. You didn't know that there was information that you weren't able to see because of your lack of humility, because that's how it works. If you don't see it, when you don't see information, then you also don't know that you don't see the information. And I'll give you an example. You don't know, like you don't see the wavelengths of, let's say, of information you can't perceive. So, for example, maybe radio waves or internet, whatever it is, however it is that wireless internet travels, you can't see it, so you cannot you can't see the information being passed, so you wouldn't even know when the information passes you, right? Hypothetically. So you don't have the ability to tune into that. So if you close off that valve, the valve that receives that piece of information, then you don't know that there's information behind that receptor. If you suddenly became deaf, you wouldn't be able to hear what sounds are passing by, and you wouldn't know that there were sounds passing you by. If you suddenly became blind, you wouldn't see the pixels on your screen changing, and you wouldn't know that the pixels on your screen are changing. And just seeing this first page made me stop, and I've been thinking about these two questions all day. And it's so I mean, the books I read, it's like the more I read, the more I realize that I need to really start calming. I need to start opening my mind. And then to do that, I must first calm down. Only when the mind is at peace can you properly receive new information. And actually, this is a great segue into something else I wanted to talk about. But I don't know if I have enough time to do that, so either this video... Okay, you know what? I'm just going to make this video long. Or maybe I'll just make this a segue into tomorrow. Okay. Okay, it's fine. I want to talk about cultivation, which is... And I'm not talking about crops. I'm talking about the Chinese culture and Taoism or such. I've read a lot of cultivation stories, and if you strip away the magic, it really seems to be about the same as what these books are saying. So here is reality. Now, here's the thing. I never really thought of it this way because I just read it as fiction, fantasy, whatever. This simple, these stories that I wasted my time reading. But let's look at it as a setting, and the Taoism. So here we have reality, and here we have the magical stories, and I'm going to strip away the magic and describe it in a way that lies somewhere in between. And so here are the elements. Cultivation. Here are some general aspects of the setting of cultivation. First of all, one must cultivate the heart before cultivating the body. They always talk about making peace in your heart so that you will not be agitated by temptations. There is always the demon path, the demonic path, which is to say, and that is the one that harms other people and must be stopped. It is the path of quick but self-destructive progress in which everything here is measured by power levels. So basically, good decisions are meant to be reflected in, or like, progress is reflected in your strength, because strength is at the core of everything. There are resources out there that you want, that are, so there are things that you want to obtain, but to obtain them you need strength. And obtaining them can help you gain, generally speaking, the most valuable resources are the ones that can make you stronger. And when you reach a certain strength, then the resources that were valuable to you before are no longer useful to you, because they would no longer make you stronger because you've leveled up. And so you would need better resources. So an element here is that if you want to get stronger, or if you want to make progress, you will need to seek new resources. Next element. What if you don't want to get stronger? What if you don't want to keep moving the goalpost? What if you want to just settle? Well, here's the thing. Becoming stronger is also tied with longevity. So a lot of the time, the characters will forever seek more strength because they want more longevity. However, there is no real goalpost, and many characters will end up dying out, always seeking more longevity while never having lived any of it for anything other than obtaining more longevity. And then they die of old age, is seeking new strength. Okay, what else? Any resource you want must first be predicated by your ability to compete for them. You cannot, you will always fail to compete for resources for a higher level because you're too weak. Unless you're the main character, it's possible. With specific planning, you blah, 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 whatever. Okay. Let's talk about other principles. You must build a sturdy foundation, or else it will limit your upper limit of achievement. just like when you build a building. The limit of the height of the building is already decided after you build the first floor. I'll give you an example. If your first floor is 1 feet, it is impossible for your fifth floor to be 2 feet. Your upper floors are only going to get smaller, which is why your height, the upper limit of your height, is determined by the strength, the structural integrity, the size of your foundation. And also, the better your foundation, the slower it will take to build. If you think about it, if you have because if you want to have higher upper limits, you're going to have to take your time at the bottom. Okay. Now, let's talk about how they get stronger. And okay, first of all, what is the demon path? It is basically when they fail to control their desires and are now going to live impulsively for whatever they feel like doing and are no longer restrained by themselves. They decide to become unrestrained and go after their impulses. And so what is the main foundation of cultivation? It is meditation. It is when you, and the point of it is that to get stronger, when you meditate, it is to absorb the worldly wisdom. It is to understand how the world works. It's basically meant to be like science, but it is to receive, when you sit there and achieve inner peace and absorb the information of the world, while resisting temptations and urges and impulses until you are finished with your meditation, then you can become better. You can become stronger. You can level up. So your strength is correlated with your discipline. Your peace, how rested and cultivated your heart is, and then from only when you have inner peace and are able to understand the world and how the world works, can you wield the powers of the world in your favor. And that is what the dharmic powers are. That is the magical powers. It is executed through your understanding of how the world works, so that you can get the things, so that you can manifest in the world the results you wish to see. So it is most interesting to me that okay, and here's the thing, right? And the main conflicts and difficulties the main characters will face are going to be the same kind of characters. They're going to be characters who are at the same level as them, but got there through resources they didn't have to obtain for themselves. So that way, they didn't have to cultivate their mind as much to achieve where they achieved, and so they are more easily agitated. They are more impulsive. They're more attuned to the 7 deadly sins. Pride, lust, wrath, gluttony, all of these urges, and good main characters, because they actually have to cultivate their mind to get to this level, they are not as prone to the 7 deadly sins. As the conflict arises, they must defeat these characters, and they level up and find new opponents who are the same case, who lived with, maybe they start against opponents with bronze spoons because their level hasn't reached that high, but as they level up, they face people with silver spoons, they face people with gold spoons, platinum spoons, diamond spoons, magic spoons, and so on, right? And so their opponents get stronger, but their personalities are all the same, because if their opponents were ones that also had to cultivate their mind, they would also be at peace. And occasionally you'll see these like friends and rivals that they meet who understand that it's not about, you know, they also have control of their 7 deadly sins. And so what's the takeaway here? The point really is that we must cultivate the heart. And this is a real world phenomenon. Because when we cultivate the heart and our ability to speak less and listen more, to try less to impose on the world and more to receive information from the world, and only then can we manifest our wills in the world, because the world has told us how.